If I ask today, and we can all ask this ourselves this, what are both sides in the conflict today achieving by this use of violence? Nothing.
If you look like more specifically at like the outcome of World War II and the assault of the fascist regime at the time, is sort of continued on into the legacy of how the Israeli military and the Israeli politicians function in a way. It's become very fascist, in my opinion, and I think in maybe a lot of other people's opinions, the situation has come to that of a genocide, in fact, or close to. And I'm sort of curious about your thoughts about the sort of eugenics of the situation, like about the sort of cultural cleansing of different tribes and different races. That I sort of see it in this perspective, like that it's almost like that it's the peace treaty is just an illusion. It's not like something that's ever due to be achieved. It's just something to sort of distract the attention of the public in order to basically annihilate a whole race in the meantime.
I think we have to be very precise. There's always a danger in getting carried away with analogies that are not quite precise on the ground. And this is not by way of taking sides. As I say, I consider myself a supporter of Palestine and the Palestinian cause. But calling, for example, the Israeli leadership fascist is somehow erroneous. And again, this is not in their defense, because fascist societies are characterized by certain characteristics that you don't actually find in Israel. Equally, talking about genocide or comparing that to the Holocaust is not productive, and it's not by any means by way of defending them. It's more, if you want to get more out of understanding of the conflict, you have to be really objective, and you have to understand what happens over there. So it's a very kind of brutal situation, absolutely. It's not genocide, and this is not just a linguistic game. Because if we get carried away and we sort of raise the tone of the accusation rather than the understanding, then there's absolutely no way that we're going to get a grasp on it. I would say, let's try to understand how this violence is happening and why it's happening. And I would say absolutely the Israeli society as a whole, not just leadership, has been showing a lot of disregard for the lives of Palestinians. And you could probably say the opposite as well. And I mean, I don't want to get into these discussions. But that doesn't translate into saying this is about fascism or genocide or anything like that. This is precisely a violence that comes out of a complete lack of any sense of control or lacking any political project on the ground. Because if you say, what is Israel trying to achieve by that? Let's ask that question. What does it try to achieve by the deployment of this extreme violence? If we're saying it's like the ethnic cleansing, then you would say, well, their biggest problem would be the Arabs that are actually within Israel itself, not the Arabs outside. Because they can simply, and they've started doing that, just build a wall and say, let's leave these people to their own affairs and let them manage, and we don't care about that. And in a sense, Israeli kind of politics is in such a state of bankruptcy that it's effectively doing that. It's just completely building a wall between itself and the Palestinians so as not to have to deal with that issue. But the other side of the coin is within Israel itself, what it considers to be Israel proper. Today, the Arab population is roughly 20%. They do not feel part of Israeli society. Their language is not spoken. They can't get jobs like Jewish kind of citizens of Israel. There's all sorts of things. But they are by no means under pressure to kind of leave the country or being subjected to violence or anything like that. So in order to be more accurate, I would say there's a situation in which there's injustice, there's inequality, and the solution is definitely not to compound the issues by kind of comparing it with misleading analogies from the past, but to understand the specific dynamics of that. And what I would like to say is what I said in my introduction, is this sense of lack of self-control, lack of a political platform, that politics is what I have to do every day, how I shape my life, how I want my society to be. It's all these questions, and it takes effort from everyone to keep answering these questions every day. We can't just sit back and go and vote once in every 4 years and hope for things to turn out for the better. So that's the kind of sense that I feel is much more needed than that sense of exaggeration.
Speaking of the genocide issue, one thing I find interesting with that is it seems to be almost a way for the Western media to kind of produce a pseudo-insightful analysis of the situation, because it always has like a sort of poetic ring to it, kind of the victims then become the Nazis. And there's a sense also that ties in with the competitive victimhood you were talking about as well, I think, in that both sides want to make claim to the genocide victim status. So you'll get people who support the Israelis. If quite often I find that when their views are criticised, they respond to it saying that's anti-Semitic, you can't criticise us for that reason, which is nonsense, obviously. And then, but similarly, Palestinian protesters are kind of encouraging the labelling of the Gaza situation as a genocide, or comparison to, say, the Warsaw Ghetto, which seem to be circulating across the moment. And I think it does tie into what you're saying.
We've been talking a lot about sort of the problems in Palestine and Israel in our discussion right now, and all the problems with the way that we interpret those problems, etc. And I just want to sort of ask or comment on two things. Maddie mentioned earlier about anti-Semitism today, and you said it's different to in the past, etc. And a lot of people today will say, actually, we're anti-Zionists, we're not anti-Semites, which is a perfectly reasonable thing to say. But what I think is interesting, if we go back to the protest, for example, in London just a few weeks ago, a lot of the anti-Israel protesters, they come from, they range from people like the socialists, the left, Islamic fundamentalists, and all these kind of really different range of groups, and so you want to know inside your head, what do these people have in common? And one of the things they have in common is they're, quite disillusioned about modernity and the future and all that kind of stuff. And also, just going back to what Mike said earlier about sort of the boycott of Starbucks, or, that whole thing. You had the destruction of the Starbucks in Kensington a couple of weeks ago as well, which is, it's quite a big reaction. But it's also a lot wider than that, and it's general. There's these emails and text messages and all of that going all across the globe amongst these networks that boycott Starbucks because they directly fund the Israeli military. So if you go there, you're supporting that. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because that came out of like a myth in the sense that a rumor, about this guy who wrote a spoof saying that the CEO of Starbucks is directly funding, and he actually admitted that this was just a spoof, this is not true, but it has spread like wildfire, to the point where you get these outrages like the destruction of Starbucks in Kensington and the whole boycott and all that kind of stuff. So what I want to know is, in terms of the international community and our reaction to this problem, what do you think is behind these reactions? Because they seem quite irrational when you think about them, So what do you think is the reason behind it?
I think there's something very crucial that you said, so I suspect you probably know the answer more than I do. You said it's a bit, there's something anti-modern about it, and there's this trend towards being driven by sensitivities of that. The world around us is changing, and we've carried on for too far, and maybe we should kind of slow down a little bit. And it's something everybody feels everywhere now, and it's gaining a lot of momentum. And it manifests itself in different things, surely for politics, but also in the attitude towards the environment and all these sorts of things, where we see, if you like, a universal now, almost universal rejection of the values of modernity and progress. And in a sense, the way you actually look at it closely in modernity, and I think back to what Mike, you said originally, and you almost meant it as a critique, that it's a way of returning to modern politics. I don't want to say it was the good olden days, but in that era of history that we generally consider to be modernity, the politics of self-determination was much more active than today. And in a sense, this rainbow coalition, if you like, is not cheerful as that. There's some nasty characters in that, but one thing you have to say is you have to respect that people, first of all, feel something and they want to do something about it. And the fact if you have a coalition in itself is not necessarily a problem. It's just that the unique nature of all these partners in that coalition is a bit baffling.